Welcome to the Close Encounter Club. I'm your host, Justin Gearhart. You know, one of my favorite aspects of starting this podcast so far is a bit surprising to me. It's the people that I'm meeting. And I'm not talking about them sharing their experiences with me. I'm talking about that they're just generally really awesome people. And I've been connecting with them in ways that is very unexpected to me. For example, this week we're speaking with Josh, who's from Australia. And when he was 18, his family was out of town and he was staying home alone. And he had an experience that is very unexplainable. It left him questioning his reality. And that experience sent him on a quest to figure out his belief system. And that rings true with me for the reasons why I started this podcast. In this episode, we do talk about that experience I mentioned that Josh had when he was 18. But then the conversation goes off the rails in the best way possible. Josh is very knowledgeable about ancient religions and about consciousness. He actually was a Freemason for a while, which is really cool. He's also had multiple UFO experiences. All of this while still remaining very skeptical and questioning everything, which resonates very deeply with me. This is episode 4. The title is Noble Park, and you're listening to the Close Encounter Club.
My name is Josh. I'm 38 years. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. I spent most of my life in Australia. I'm a marketing and experience director for a fairly large health organization. So my hobbies are music. I'm a very creative person. I play and write music as sort of a bit of a creative personal outlet. So I'm also very interested in photography. I did photography professionally full-time for a number of years, but found that it was hard to maintain a passion for photography once it became a job and my day-to-day life depended on it. So I relegated it once again to just a hobby on the side. These days, I spend most of my time actually hiking. I'm an outdoors person, so I go camping and multi-day hiking, usually at least once or twice a month. If I can, even just for a night or two. And I try and spend as much time as possible out in the bush, under the stars, around mountains in nature. It's where I get my peace, and it's proved to be, excellent for my mental health. So that's how I spend most of my free time. I was raised in a very devout evangelical Christian family. My dad was a preacher, an evangelist. He became a pastor before he passed away. And being raised in that environment, you are going to church every Sunday, often Bible studies, prayer meetings, and you get exposed to spiritualism, albeit quite a narrow, lens of it, sort of through the doctrine of, or through the filter, I guess, of sort of modern Christianity. But, that in a sense really does kind of provide you with some insight, I think, and some understanding of, I guess, what Christians would describe as like the spiritual realm or God moving through the Holy Spirit, those sorts of things, I'm not a religious person now at all. I left the church in my late teens, my mid-teens, and by the time I was in my mid-20s, I would have called myself an atheist. These days, my views have softened a little bit, and I'm not at all leaning back towards Christianity or contemporary religion, but between the experiences I had as a Christian when I was younger and, what I've experienced as an adult, what I've heard and learned from talking to people and doing my own exploration of the sort of supernatural topic broadly, I've definitely softened a bit my stance towards spirituality and the idea of God. I don't know that I would ever define God as God, in the traditional sense. But, I do have a view that right now that material science can only get us so far. And I think we need to really look at the material side and look into that. I suspect if we learn a lot more about what consciousness is, if we can start to quantify that in one way or another, we may learn a lot about where the truth lies in lots of different religions and experiences that people have. So, as I've grown up and had my own experiences and spoken with people who've had theirs, I believe that there is something going on. It's just been framed the wrong way, or it's been framed potentially the right way and then manipulated or worked into a new formula that's, effectively been used to exert control over people or get money. You sort of see what late stage religion looks like when it's just give us your money to fund my private jet, or it's, or it's the guilt tripping kind of Catholic guilt, or if you don't, give 10% of your income to your church or purgatory or things like that. So, it's, I think there's truth in a lot of the spiritual things that exist in the world, but I think there's only a small amount of truth in all of it. But if you can find the truth in all the different parts, or in all the different religions, or in all the different belief systems or experiences that are had, if you can find a little bit of truth that exists in all of them, you might be able to draw a reasonably well-formed picture of what could actually be happening. And so that's what I've tried to do as much as possible as an adult, is kind of learn a bit about, or a lot about a whole bunch of religious history and older philosophy and find the consistencies and elements of truth within those to help inform, I guess, a slightly more rounded and full opinion that I can share, which I haven't yet got that. I can't articulate my belief in like a sentence, but I can say that I'm constantly striving to do that. But being raised a born-again Christian, you feel the power of prayer. You see the rituals that they undergo. Communion is a really unusual ritual if you think about it outside of the lens of the church. And so, those sorts of things combined with mass prayer, the singing of songs with a group of people who have a singular focus on worshiping a God, regardless of whether or not you believe in the God. The truth is that being in that state in a room with people who have such singular focus does produce some sort of experience one way or another. And that's the experience, I think, that results in people being converted to a particular religion or is transformational to people. But my personal belief is that experience doesn't have to exclusively exist within the four walls of church, that there's many ways to access those things. So, that's what I'm trying to find out as I grow up is how can we access those things and what can we learn from them once we do. From about 15 to 18, 19 years old, we lived, my family and I, which was my mum, my dad, and my sister, and I lived in a house in a suburb of Melbourne called Noble Park. It's in Melbourne's southeast, maybe a 45-minute drive from the city. It was definitely at the time a sort of lower socioeconomic area. There were lots of poor people living there. The street we lived on was called Elt Crescent, and the street was just made up of your typical 70s, 80s brick veneer homes that all very much looked the same. Our house was really stood out on the street. It was an old Western European architecture. It was this weatherboard home with very steeped roofs, as if the roofs were designed to keep the snow off, even though we lived in Australia and there was no snow where we were. It was designed in that fashion. So, it was a 2-story home upstairs with 3 bedrooms, and all the roofs were triangular shaped because of the steepness of the roof of the house, including my bedroom. Had an old sort of picket fence out the front. The house was very old. It wasn't falling apart, but it was close to falling apart. In the lounge room, you could look down at the floorboards and see through the gaps in the floorboards the dirt underneath the house and the ground. And the house had shifted over the years, so none of the doors closed properly. You had to kind of give them an extra push to close them, and then an extra push to open them again. And it was just a very old, creepy house. I was 18 at the time. I remember being 18, and I remember this happening around November, December. And those dates are clear to me because I got my first office job at 18. Before that, I had worked doing some trades as a teenager, as well as studying. But I got my first office job. It was a call center job with an insurance company that was about a 25-minute walk from my house. So it was really convenient because I was 18, but I hadn't yet. I got my license. In Australia, you can't get your license and drive by yourself until you're 18. Could start to learn at 16, but I couldn't get my license until I was 18, and I waited. I was very frustrated at the time because I turned 18 at the end of June, and this was November, December, and I hadn't got my license yet, so I was still walking to work. And yeah, one day I was walking home from work. At the time, I was working from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., 5 days a week, and so I was walking home, usually getting home around 8:30. This was a month or two into daylight savings time, so being in Melbourne, kind of near the bottom of the planet, we get very long days in the summer, especially with daylight saving time. The sun doesn't actually set till 9:30 p.m. And so coming home around 8:30, walking down the street towards my house, I turned a corner on my street and I could see my house across the road, maybe 50 meters tops away from where I was standing, and the sun was setting behind it with the light sort of coming straight into my face. And this night on the way home from work, I looked at my house, and on the left side of my house is a carport with a tin roof. And if you stand on that roof, you can look straight inside one of the 3 bedrooms upstairs in the house that had a window going onto that tin roof. So I had walked home from work this night around 8:30 p.m., turned the corner, seen my house, and then noticed a figure standing on the carport roof looking into the window. It was just a silhouette because the sun was behind it. It definitely took me a few seconds to realize what I was looking at, but it clicked that, I think someone's like looking into the house to see if someone's home. Someone might be casing out the place or trying to break in. And so I had just come home, and my first reaction after seeing that was to kind of yell at them. And so I kind of yelled out, "Hey," or "What are you doing?" or something like that. And as I yelled out and kind of like took a few steps towards the place, I saw the silhouette just kind of shrink and disappear. I thought it was a bit odd, but my mind at the time was very much like, I think I just saw a shadow of a tree or something cast against the wall. And as I've moved, the position of the tree in relation to the sun has moved for me. And so I've seen the shadow just disappear. And that's all I chalked that up to. I went and checked the doors, the windows. I had a really big guard dog. He was a Rhodesian Ridgeback, and he was sleeping under that roof at the exact time this happened. He didn't bark. He didn't hear anything. It was a tin roof. If someone ran off that tin roof, it would have been loud. The dog would have gone crazy, but everything was quiet. So I just carried on with the rest of my evening as I normally would. I didn't think of it again because I assumed, well, it must have just been a shadow. And I didn't think of it again after that. Yeah, so then the next day is when I had my unusual experience. Much like the day before, was walking home from work, the same route, same time. Come around the corner, there's no shadow this time there's no silhouette or no shadow cast on the carport roof. So, go through my usual routine, feed the dog, play with him a little bit, clean up the place, and at night, before I go to bed, because it is a poorer area and break-ins happen from time to time, I went around the house and checked all the windows, checked all the doors, deadbolts, made sure everything was locked. It was an older house, so, older places, they hadn't really figured out the whole open plan concept yet, so everything was like little rooms. Every room had a door, so I would go around at night and close all the internal doors. Mostly because the house was old and the doors didn't, they would shut, but you'd have to push them hard closed because things had shifted and, the place would get drafty sometimes and I didn't want to hear a door open in the middle of the night. And so I'd shut all the doors, put the dog to sleep. He slept in his kennel outside under the carport, brushed my teeth, closed the bathroom door, turned off all the lights and went up to my bedroom and fell asleep. My bedroom is not the bedroom next to the carport window. It's on the other end of the corridor. If you look through the window above the carport, you'll see straight into the bedroom there. But if that door is open to that bedroom, you can see down the corridor into my room. And so I went to bed that night and closed my door, turned off all the lights, and fell asleep like it was a regular night. I was home alone at the time. My dad was overseas. My mom and my sister were visiting some family in regional Victoria, about a 2.5 hour drive away. And they had been there for pretty much the whole week I From memory, I think they were coming back on like the Sunday, and this is happening on a Friday night or a Thursday night. So I had the house to myself. Now, my bedroom layout, if I can just set this up real quickly, is that if you open the door to my bedroom, you'll see the foot of my bed. And then my bed is lined up against the wall, long ways from the door. So the head of the bed is on the far wall, the foot of the bed is facing the door. On the right side of the bedroom as you walk in is a little cabinet that has a little stereo, a little television, PlayStation 2 at the time, and had a guitar and books and posters and all the things that you would love in your bedroom as an 18-year-old. And asleep at this point for a few hours that night when something woke me up. I sat up in my bed. I don't know what woke me up. I didn't hear anything. I didn't wake up at the start, but I woke up. And when I woke up, I noticed that the hallway light was on. And even though my bedroom was closed, there was a gap under the door and I could see the light coming in from the hallway. So I think to myself, I must have forgotten to turn off the hallway light. I'm tired. Go to lie back down again. At this point, it's probably a little after 2 a.m. As I lie back down, I'm lying on my side, mind you, and I'm looking towards the wall with the stereo on it and the posters while lying on my side. And at this point, I hear my door handle start to make a rattling sound. It starts to turn. And this is an old house, man. Like, all the door handles in this house are kind of old and loose. If you've ever had to open some of those round door handles that are loose, you twist them, and then you kind of have to twist them a little more often to get the snib to come into the door so you can open it. I could hear the door turning, and it sounded like someone was trying to open the door, but, we're having to, like, twist the handle a bit extra to get in. So the first thing I think is, oh my God, someone's broken into the house, and they're going to steal some stuff. And I'm here by myself. It's a bit of a rough neighborhood. I'm alone. My heart starts pounding as I think about what am I going to do. They're going to open the door. I don't think I have much time before they come in. And I assume as you do in these areas that if someone's going to rob the house, they're not going to be by themselves. And so I think to myself, right, I'm going to lie back down and pretend I'm asleep and hope that whoever's trying to rob my place just takes what they need and they leave. And they think as far as they're concerned, I'm still asleep. Maybe they can just take what they need and quietly get out. So I stay laying down on my left side, looking towards the wall on the right side of my bedroom. And I see a pillar or a line of light here on the wall. Just a narrow band of light going from top to bottom. And that band of light starts to widen. And I realize that the door's open now. And the light is pouring in from the hallway and hitting the wall in this straight line. And then that line of light is getting wider as the door opens. And the door is opening wide because the bedroom is lit up. At this point, I'm lying on my side, looking at the wall, thinking someone's coming in my room. I've got my right eye closed, which is the eye that's up and kind of facing that you'd be able to see if you're walking into my room. And I keep my left eye a little bit open so I can kind of get a visual of my bedroom. And I see that band of light expand on the wall as the door opens, and then it closes again. And I think to myself, okay, someone's opened the door and seen me in here and closed it. Now they're either going to leave or they're going to rob the place and go. In my mind, I think I'm not going to try and stand up to this person. I'm not going to try and fight them. I'll probably get my ass kicked. There'll probably be more than one of them and just take what they like and go. So I decide to pretend I'm asleep and I listen really intently to whatever I can hear to figure out what's going on. I don't hear anything. It's actually pretty quiet. I can hear my heart beating in my ears. If you've ever been really like anxious or scared, you can really hear your heart in your ears, like beating loud when everything else is silent. It almost gives you the impression that there was like a sound vacuum, and all of a sudden the sound of my body became really loud in my ears. And I think to myself, okay, someone's definitely in the house. If I hear anything, I'll just keep listening and hopefully they'll go. And shortly after, I feel the blankets around my feet are really tight. Just around my feet, though. And I feel this pressure on the bed. And then I feel the mattress sink down near my feet. And my heart starts racing. And my mind's going a million miles an hour because I realize that I think someone or something sat on the end of my bed and is still in the room with me. At this point, I don't really know what to make of the situation. I'm scared. I think someone's sitting on the end of my bed. My mind's racing. My heart's racing. I'm hearing the blood flow through my ears. And all I can think is someone is just watching me sleep while someone else is probably robbing the house just to make sure I don't cause any trouble. So after a minute or two, I managed to kind of calm myself down just a little bit, start running through these little, these sort of quiet breathing exercises and counting in my head. And I think to myself at this point, I'm like, maybe I'm having a night terror. Now, they're very distinct. And I had been given a book at some point when I was maybe around 10 or 11 or 12 years old to read about how to manage those. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was actually a book on how to lucid dream. But the sort of prevailing theory at the time was that if you can get yourself to lucid dream, you can snap out of a night terror really quick because you'll identify that you're dreaming or that you're in that state. And so I started doing some of the things I learned from there just to try and wake myself up, because at this point I'm gripping, I'm dreaming. I look around the room, I look at my stereo, I can just make out the brand name on the stereo because there's a clock next to it that's gently illuminating that area. And it looks perfect. It's not a different word. It's not kind of fuzzy. It doesn't look like one of those AI images that just couldn't get stuff right. It, like things tend to look in a dream. The clock looks good. Everything is in place around my room. My eye starts adjusting more to the darkness so I can see a little bit of the bedroom. And I realize, no, I'm not in a dream. I'm thinking about this. And one of the other things you can do to kind of help yourself identify if you're in a dream is you can have like a totem, or you can do things like study your hands or study something so familiar to you and get to know it really well, because in a dream state, it won't be quite the same and you realize that. And so I had this little pocket knife that was wedged into my bed frame. And as I'm laying there on my left side, my right hand is kind of hanging over the bed, and I can feel the knife with my fingers in the bed frame. It's one of these blades that has a bunch of holes drilled out of the handle to reduce the weight. And I'm running my fingers along the holes, counting them. They're exactly as they should be. Nothing is out of place. I am counting in my head. I'm going through these exercises of remembering what I did that day and saying it out loud in my head, because that's a good way to identify if you're dreaming or if you're in some sort of state. Everything was normal. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't paralyzed. I was able to move my fingers. I could feel my body. I didn't feel like something was sitting on my chest. It was just something on the end of my bed. So a little time goes past. I'm watching the clock and listening for breathing. I'm listening for sounds of movement, anything. And I can't hear anything, but I can feel the blankets tied around my feet and this weight at the end of the bed and the mattress dipping down a little bit. So after some time goes by, you sort of think to yourself, you do kind of identify that it's a bit weird, that it feels like it's been like an hour at this point, and this person thing is on the end of my bed not moving. I can't hear anyone in the house. If someone's robbing the place, they're in and out faster than that. You start to question the motive of this thing, and then you start to question, like, am I imagining this? Is there someone there? And it's a little after 3 a.m. at this point. I get the bright idea that, I can shuffle in my sleep. I can pretend to sleep and just kind of move a little bit in bed, right, to get more comfortable. And I think to myself, I'm going to turn from on my side to on my stomach. And as I do that, I'm going to move my legs around. And if there is something on the end of the bed, I'm going to feel it. Or it's going to move. At this point, my heart's still beating pretty fast, but I'm a little more in control of that emotional state I was in earlier when it first happened. And I decide, okay, I'm going to roll into my stomach. And so I roll, I guess, kind of counterclockwise onto my stomach. And as I do that, my right leg sort of comes over the top of my left leg. And the idea is that I'd roll over and have both my feet kind of flat on the bed as opposed to on their side. And as I did that, my right leg came over my left leg and it hit something solid, whatever it was that was sitting on my bed. My leg connected with it. Gently, it wasn't a kick, it was a shuffle, but connected with it. And so at that point, I just kind of stopped shuffling and acted as if I went back to sleep, but my heart started racing again because I've just realized, no, there is absolutely something on the end of your bed. On your breathing, again, I couldn't see anything without moving my head around to look at it. And my mind's racing. I'm like, what kind of person comes into my house and just sits down and watches me sleep at the end of my bed, sorry. I'm not sure really what to do. You sort of think to yourself, well, that's a very creepy person that does that. And maybe not a completely sane person. And so, I still think at this point that the best thing is just to pretend I'm sleeping and hopefully they'll leave. And this is all been happening at this point for over an hour. It might be 3:30 around that time. When I don't know what happens, from my perspective, I can tell you that it just felt like a minute or two had passed. But I looked at the clock again, the little digital clock on my stereo, and it was like 5 a.m. It was after 5. A good 2 hours had passed. I remember looking at the clock and kind of getting a bit shocked and thinking, I think I must have fallen asleep again. And I've just woken up at 5 a.m. I think to myself, my first thought is, holy crap, that was probably just a really bad dream. Not really concerned with where the time went. I assumed I was dreaming, or maybe it was wishful thinking, and so I shuffled a little bit in bed again. And sure enough, the blankets were tight, the mattress was depressed down the bottom near my feet, and my feet rubbed against something solid on my bed. It all started coming back to me. And the anxiety, my heart was racing, the realization that it wasn't a dream, the lack of obvious motivation or explanation as to why someone would do this is running through my head. At that point, I notice that the room has changed a little bit. It's a bit brighter. It's not lit up by any means, but I realize that it's now approaching 6 a.m. and the sun is, it's not up yet, but that moment before the sun peaks up where everything kind of goes a lighter shade of gray or a lighter blue than the deep sort of black blue of the night sky in preparation for the sunrise. In the room, it's sort of taken on that color as a bit more light was coming through the window from outside as the day approached. And I realized that, this has never been a good 4 hours of this, 2 of which I just disappeared completely. Hear the first birds chirp in the tree just outside the window. And I realized, oh my God, it is actually morning. And I don't know what is going on, but I'm still in this situation. Something is still at the end of my bed. There's no noise. I can't explain it. Before 6 a.m., as I'm laying there, still pretending I'm asleep, trying to figure out what is going on, I feel the weight at the end of the bed leave. The tightness around my feet disappears. My anxiety and my heart rate starts going up again as I think to myself, oh my God, they're standing up. Something's going to happen. And at that point, just like it did 4 hours earlier, that sort of beam or slice of light appeared on the wall, got wider again as the door opened and the light from the hallway came in. And then it got narrower and eventually closed as the door closed, and I could hear the handle closing the door. My heart's absolutely racing at this point. I'm trying to listen as much as I can over the sound of my heartbeat. And this sounds crazy, but in that state, I could actually hear the sound of blood in my veins. I could hear this sound of running water or blood rushing. It was quite terrifying. I wait a few minutes, maybe 5 to 15 minutes. I actually don't know how long I sat there for or I laid there after the door opened and closed for that second time. But I listened for footsteps, to hear someone leave, to hear the dog bark, to hear anything. And I heard nothing. And so after a little bit of time, no more than 15 minutes, I sat up in my bed. I looked around my room. There's nothing missing. There's nothing changed. My door's closed again. The light is still on in the hallway. I can see it coming through the bottom of the door, and it's starting to get bright now as the morning approaches. I get up out of my bed. I open my bedroom door and I look down the hallway towards the other room. All those doors are still closed. And then I go through the house and start looking at every window, at every door, at every entry point to see if someone has broken into the home. There's no windows that are open. These are old school internal latching windows with a metal handle that just gets pulled down and locks the window to the frame. They're very hard to open from the outside and probably even harder to close from the outside. The doors haven't been opened. They're still dead bolted shut. The security door's locked. And I can't find any evidence of someone having broken into the house. The dog is asleep outside, hasn't made a noise. I let the doggy in and just kind of kept him inside with me that morning because I was recovering, I think, from the scary night. And then, went to work that day, went out that night. And within a few days, I had stopped thinking about it. And I had just kind of chalked it up to potentially my imagination or potentially something else. But with the exception of telling my cousin and my girlfriend at the time, I didn't really speak of it again for years. But I never stopped thinking about it. I know at night terrors over and sleep paralysis. And it wasn't that. I wasn't paralyzed. I wasn't asleep. It happened over many hours. And something absolutely came into my room, opened and closed the door, and then sat on my bed for about 4 hours that night. And then right before sunrise, opened the door, closed the door, and left.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with the rest of the story. So, I mean, if you try to be analytical about it, there's a couple options here that are, I guess, rational. I guess it could technically have been a human that came into your room and sat down, which is equally as creepy as something being paranormal or unexplained.
Yeah, I find it probably more creepy to think that there might have been a person who got into the house and just watched me sleep. That's pretty terrifying. If it was, because I'm a huge skeptic in a lot of ways, and I don't like to rush. As much as I want to believe in some of this stuff, I don't want to rush to believe it. I do need to believe that, the most likely explanation is probably the explanation. And so, yeah, thinking rationally, for someone to have done what they would have done, they would have needed a key to the house to get in and out like that without having broken into anything, unless there was a secret entry to the house I wasn't aware of. And then the motivation of that individual to sit down and watch me sleep for 4 hours and then just quietly leave.
Yeah.
Is one that, it's hard to figure that one out.
Looking back at it, do you think that there was or is a connection between that shadow that you saw on your carport roof and what happened to you the next night? Yeah,
the morning after the incident, I spoke to the neighbor across the road who was kind of like your typical neighborhood watch kind of guy who watched everyone on the street through his lantern window and just knew what was going on in the neighborhood. Like he was just plugged in, that kind of person. And lovely guy. And I went and spoke to him because he knew my dad was overseas and that I was in the house. And I asked him, has there been any break-ins? Are you aware of, anything like that happening down the street? And I told him, I said, the day, like yesterday, 2 days ago, I saw this shadow on the roof until the experience I had the following night. So I did think about the connection there for a while. The more I think about it, about that silhouette looking into my window, the less it makes sense to me, because the sun, first of all, the sun was behind the silhouette shining on me. So a shadow shouldn't have been cast the direction it was cast if it was a shadow. The sun would have had to have cast a shadow from a tree that was beside the garage. Or the sun would have had to have been behind me to cast a shadow in the direction it was going. So I don't need to tell myself I just saw a shadow disappear as I changed my perspective on it as I moved. But, that doesn't really make sense either. It's just something I've told myself over the years to kind of explain away the potential of something more, I guess, paranormal or metaphysical. And it wasn't, I had shared this story really minimally over the last 20 years. It wasn't until I really posted it on Reddit, and I made my first ever Reddit post this year. And I just shared the story to a couple of subreddits to see what people thought and if anyone had a similar experience. It was then that I got a lot of messages from people, including yourself, asking, more questions or commenting that they had had similar experiences. And at that point, I started to lean a little more towards accepting the idea that something else might have been at play. But I don't know what that is, I don't know what would have the motivation to do that. I did have people talk to me about the missing few hours. I tend to glaze over that part of the story in flat because there's not much to tell other than it went from just after 3 to just after 5 and in a matter of seconds. But that part of the story seems to hold significance with people who have had similar experiences.
When you lost time, a minute seemed to have passed, but then it was 2 hours later. Did you feel like you transitioned into sleep, or did you transition into something else? Meaning, like I guess what I'm trying to ask is, there's some aspects of your story that kind of do tie into like an alien abduction type deal with the time loss specifically. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective with your eyes, were you conscious that whole time and all of a sudden just boom, light starts shining in? Or was there possibly a window there where you were, I guess for lack of a better phrase, like unconscious before waking again?
Yeah. My perception, so the way it occurred to me and the way I saw it through my eyes was, in a heightened state of anxiety with my heart beating, looking at the clock, watching the clock as a way to make sure I'm not dreaming, for one. Watching the time tick up was, a really important way to make sure that, I'm awake, time is moving properly here. I went from looking at the clock, which is, it was one of the few things, it was the main thing I was looking at all night because it was the only thing that was lit up. And I guess I can explain it like this. I didn't fall asleep. I didn't feel myself drift off. My heart was racing. I was so alert that I couldn't have fallen asleep. It just wouldn't have happened. So from my perspective, I've just transitioned from around 3:30 to around 5:30 in the matter of a blink of an eye. And I didn't feel any transition state. I didn't feel myself grow tired. I didn't feel myself kind of get heavy-eyed. I was so focused on what was happening that it was really alarming to me when I noticed that 2 hours had passed, because when you're in that kind of fight or flight state and you're really working to control your body so that you just remain calm, it's exhausting. And it's not like, it's not the kind of exhausting that makes you tired. It's kind of exhausting that sort of focuses your eyes in, right? And you start to become hyper alert. That's why I think I was starting to hear what I assume was blood flowing through my ears. My hearing got really fine tuned. I was really my eyes were able to see a lot of the detail in the room after they adjusted. And so I don't believe I fell asleep. I don't know what happened. I didn't feel myself come out of a state at 5 o'clock. I literally, around 5:30, I literally blinked. But when I saw the time, my first thought was, I must have dreamt this whole thing. That was my first thought, because I was like, there's no way it's 5:30. Oh, it's 5:30 because I was probably asleep for the last 5 hours. But, it wasn't the case. It wasn't the case at all.
No waking memory of oh yeah, I'm waking up, I'm stretching, it's the morning.
No, there was a small sense of relief at 5:30 because I thought to myself, oh, I might have actually been asleep and dreamed this.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I shuffled again and realized, no, there is something on the end of my bed.
Yeah.
I realized, no, I've been awake this whole time. This is all there. This is all real. And I didn't fall back asleep again. The thing eventually got up and left. And I woke, and I just kind of like sat up in bed and looked around. That night I didn't sleep at all from effectively, maybe 2:30 till 2:30 a.m. and I didn't sleep at all after that.
Yeah, my mind races when I hear these types of stories because I'm like, I have to know what it is. I'm trying to troubleshoot the situation to be like you said, if it was a person, they would have to have a key because you checked all the doors and windows and they were all locked. So if they broke in, that is an impossibility unless they had the key, right?
Yeah.
You think alien abduction, again, we're kind of going right from rational to paranormal, but alien abduction, you think you would have had some sort of like, not memory loss, but your conscious state would have transitioned at some point. If it was something like that where they...
Yeah, and I would have thought that at some point in the last 20 years, I'd have had some sort of flashback or some kind of moment where I remembered extra detail, which I haven't had. But what I will share is, since putting the story on Reddit, as recently as yesterday, I got another message about it. I think putting the story up, I've had about 4 or 5 messages a week come through consistently. And I had another one come through yesterday from someone just saying, I'm going to recontextualize this story for you. And it was a really interesting message. The person put a lot of work into it.
Okay.
They said that they came to me yesterday and said that light wasn't coming in from your door. It wasn't your doorway. It wasn't the light from the hallway coming in through the door. They said that was your interpretation of it because that was the only thing that made sense at the time. Your heart beating in your ears and your hyper alertness, that wasn't exactly what you thought it was. They said what's likely happened to you is a light has come into your bedroom because some interdimensional or extraterrestrial being is able to use light as a form of travel. They've arrived, they've sat down on your bed and studied you. And then after you haven't woken up for a while, or they've realized that you're just pretending to be asleep and they were waiting for you to come up and face them or look at them, they've gotten impatient and said, no, that's it, we're going to take him. And then you were knocked unconscious, and then a couple hours later you were dropped off in your bed, and that the being sat on the end of your bed because they wanted to give you an explanation, but you didn't allow them. The sun came up and they left. That's kind of the more that's definitely on the more extreme end of explanations. But the truth is, this experience created a curiosity in me that I wasn't really able to satisfy after that, and led me down the path of trying to figure out what it could have been. And that's around, within a few years of that happening, I had really started to explore spiritualism through the lens of different cultures and different religious templates, plus the idea of ghosts and mediums and all that sort of stuff became interesting to me. Not because I believed in it, but because, as I said earlier, I feel like there are wedges of truth inside most old and modern belief systems, whether, it's spiritual beliefs or not, and that compiling those wedges of truth might help you form a clearer picture and an explanation of what happened. And so this event really pushed me to explore things in my life that I didn't think I was going to explore. I sought out ghost centers that were operating in Australia, and I spent, because of my photography background and my interest in video and stuff, I went and did videography for them and spent 5, 6, maybe 7 nights in total at different places that were meant to have paranormal activity, filming things, and honestly having a range of experiences myself there that I can't explain, but that I don't talk about much because I can't explain them and I don't have an idea of what happened. Those conversations don't really end up being conversations. It's just, here's what happened to me, and then it goes silent because no one knows what the fuck to make of it. So, I went and sought out those experiences. I looked in Freemasonry, spoke to Freemasons who talked about, the secrets that you can access in Freemasonry around consciousness and spirituality and all those sorts of things. So I went through the long, arduous, and frankly unusual process of becoming a master Freemason and going through my first 3 degrees and joining the lodge and getting access to some of these books that you can only access if you're a Freemason, because I wanted to read them all. And I did that for a while. I left Freemasonry after 2 years because I realized that it wasn't quite what they framed it to be. And as much as it is, there are secrets that they hold, and there is truly a secret handshake and secret passwords that all the members have to know to communicate with each other. As much as all that's true, Freemasonry at its core is, as they describe it, is really a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. And I think there is very much a truth to be found in Freemasonry about the world, about consciousness, about what it means to be a good person. But, once I got to a point in that where I realized that's probably the extent of it, and the rest of it isn't that relevant to what I'm searching for, and so I left. I also spent a number of years shouldn't say a number of years, I spent just under 2 years living in the Yukon territory, and moving between the Yukon and Alaska through a couple of winters and a couple of summers. Met people out there who had a really interesting view on the world. The Yukon is made up of people who are either highly spiritual, highly artistic and creative, or highly driven to make money through the mining scene up there. So, I plugged into somewhat of a spiritual and creative community. I was living with some of the most amazing Canadian artists, quite famous actually, as Canadian artists, on a self-sustaining farm that had adopted the principles of permaculture to deal with permafrost, and we're growing, beautiful ripe tomatoes during the weeks of darkness that never end in winter and things like that, and minus 40, 50 degree temperatures. And it was an amazing experience. But while I was out there, I tried mushrooms, and had a significant dose of mushrooms, which led to a really interesting experience in my first trip that then also helped me evolve my beliefs and helped me find a clearer direction for how I wanted to pursue the questions in my head. But I also had experiences out there with people who were really involved in and really, to their core, fundamentally believed that extraterrestrials were visiting us and that the UFOs and UAPs were commonplace, but we just weren't looking at them properly, or we weren't looking for them, or we didn't have a way of filming them. And while I was out there, I met up with a group of people. My partner went to Toronto for like a week, and I was only working a couple of days a week at the time and doing like retail it's kind of a tourist job. I met up with a group of people who were involved in the UFO UAP scene, and they took me out to this kind of small mountain out near a town called Chicken in Alaska. And we pulled up to the side of the road on this hill and looked out down this valley, and they said, from about 9:30 p.m., we're going to start seeing UFOs here. And sure enough, around 9:30 p.m., all these lights lit up on the ground and started shooting up into the sky and doing tricks and kind of moving really fast and maneuvering like crazy, just these balls of light. But that wasn't really the kind of thing I was looking for at the time. And even today, with my critical mind, I look at that and think, no, I think that was probably just very advanced drones that were being tested covertly. And so, as much as I wanted to believe in that particular instance, it was more like the most likely scenario was we were just watching the US Air Force test a whole bunch of new drone tech that we didn't have access to. At the time, drones had only just become available, in retail stores. It might have been like the first DJI Parrot had come out or something.
Right.
And so that was my explanation to that. But I had another experience out there where I was hiking to a river with someone to do some fishing. I was learning to fly fish at the time. I'd never done that before, and I was all excited. And it was a good 5-kilometer hike from the maybe 3-mile hike from the car to this river. And as I'm learning to fly fish and we're walking along this river, I see what looks to me like the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars, but as if it was facing away from me, though. It had a rounded back. I call it the back because it was rounded and there was no obvious signs it was the front. There was no windows or anything like that. And I couldn't see the front of it, but I could see the curvature of the back and the side. And it looked to me like halfway between the Millennium Falcon and a horseshoe. It kind of had that rounded back, came to 2 points at the front that weren't touching, and I could just make that out. And pointed it out to the person with me, and I said, "Can you see that? Is there like a gas station there?" Because it was only just above the tree line, and in my mind, I thought, oh, there might be a road and a gas station there, and they might have the Millennium Falcon on like a giant pole as their like signage or some spaceship, you know, because you go to Alaska and you will find people who have seen crazy stuff like UFOs and, you know, Mount Shasta stories out there are wild. And so there is UFO culture out there. And so I thought, you know, yeah, this is just a UFO on a stick, but we were nowhere near any roads. It was public land. There were no houses. This thing wasn't moving, but it looked mechanical, you know. It looked like I could make out kind of pipes and stuff on it. And then it just moved away. You know, we didn't move. It just moved away out of sight, really slowly over the trees, and then just vanished. And we didn't know what that was, but the guy I was with he's a biologist. He's a spiritual kind of leaning biologist, but not to the extent where he would hypothesize around what that kind of thing could be. He didn't want to speculate. He was like, don't know, don't care. And that was kind of the end of that. But the reason I bring up the Yukon is because during the second summer I spent there, I had what I consider to be like the most convincing UFO experience that I could have had. I've always been leaning towards skeptic because, you know, I do think extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I just don't think that the way we gather that evidence is, I don't think we've figured out how to gather this kind of evidence yet, but we will, I think. But the reason I bring it up is because I tell you these other two stories because the next experience I had 3 UAP experiences when I was in the Yukon. The next one I had was in the second summer during a beautiful hike right near the border of the Yukon and Alaska. The capital of the Yukon Territory is a city called Whitehorse. Basically everyone in the territory lives in Whitehorse. 60,000 people or so. You drive an hour and a half south of Whitehorse, you get to a town called Carcross, which means caribou crossing. Beautiful mountainous population, maybe 150. Really remote stuff. And then you drive maybe another 45 minutes south and you get to the border crossing with Alaska. But about 10 minutes before you get to the border crossing, you actually hit the actual border. So the Alaskan and Yukon border, you just drive right through it in your car on the highway. And then about, you know, maybe 10, 15 minutes after that, you get to the customs office and you have to, you know, search your car and then you do visa and all that kind of stuff. But about 15 minutes before you get there, there's a hike you can do that isn't, at the time it wasn't very well known, but I'm sure it's on Google Maps now if you search for it. It's called the International Falls hike. And it's at this place called International Falls in the Yukon. We were doing this hike. It's a beautiful hike. You literally hike along I think what ends up being about 20 or 30 waterfalls, small, medium, and large. You're just hiking up, following this river, and it's a really beautiful hike. It's green, it's mountainous. At the time, it's myself, my partner, her mum, and their dog. They have a bear dog. And we finished this hike, probably hiked about 5-6 hours. We get back to the car. I'm sitting in the back seat of the car on the left side as we're driving back north towards Carcross. Because at the time I wasn't living in Whitehorse, the capital. I was living between Whitehorse and Carcross on this farm. As we're driving, I've got my window down. I'm looking out the window and I see in the clouds what looks like a triangle or a pyramidal, sort of pyramid basically, in the sky, but just behind the clouds as the clouds are kind of passing. Now we're high up in the Alpine area. We're already in the mountains at this point, so the clouds are moving kind of fast, kind of wisping by. And I'm looking and I see this pyramid just kind of floating there that looks like it's made of smooth gray stone. It doesn't look that different from the color of the mountain. And my first thought was, oh, that's part of the mountain and I can't see the rest of the mountain because of the cloud. And it wasn't until all the clouds passed and I had like maybe a 5-second gap where there were no clouds before the next lot came in. And then I saw there was no mountain there. There was no hill. There was just this triangular stone shape floating in the sky with a completely flat bottom. And it was smooth, man. Like it was smooth on all sides. And as it came into clear view without clouds, I kind of had a bit of a, not a panic attack, but like that kind of ontological shock where you realize you're looking at something that doesn't exist within your reality. I pull out my phone and I start filming it. I'm filming it with my little Samsung Galaxy S3 as the clouds are wisping by, and the object is rotating really slowly, but it's rotating in the clouds, and you can start to see the other view, and then the clouds go by and it goes out of view, and then I don't see it anymore. And we drove home.
Do you still have that video?
So no. So when I was when I got home, because I pointed it out to my partner who was sitting in the front seat, she looked at it too and thought, what the hell is that? She wasn't looking at it as long as I was, and her mother, who was driving, didn't see it. She was driving down the highway at the time, and these roads, you can't really pull over on them. A lot of them don't have shoulders when you're going around the windy mountains. And so we just kept driving. But that video I sent to my cousin and I sent to my sister as soon as I got home and back into service. Then while I was in the Yukon, that phone got smashed. But I've kept it. I still have that phone because I know I've got that video on it. Recently, I pulled out the phone, tried to recover from it what I could, and I couldn't get much of it. I sent it in to data recovery specialists to pull everything off the hard drive. And they were able to pull about 50 to 60% of what I had on the hard drive, but that video wasn't one of them. I got those results back about a week ago. I went to my cousin, I went to my sister, I said, do you remember that video I sent you of that UFO? And they said, yep, we saw it. They remember it. We went back through all the videos we had shared on Messenger, but I recorded this video in 2014. You go back through messages and things you've shared, it just doesn't go back that far. And so the video wasn't there either. I did recently have a memory come back to me of making a backup of all that stuff on that phone before it smashed. Like I backed it up to the cloud. I remember it because I changed phones while I was there to the Sony Xperia. And when you have a Sony phone, you get access to the Sony cloud. And I uploaded everything that I transferred across from my phone onto the cloud. I managed to get back into that storage file recently because Sony sent out an email saying they're about to wipe it all and download what you need. And so I went in and found a whole bunch of stuff from the Yukon, and that video wasn't in there, which is really frustrating, like really frustrating. I don't tell the story much because I don't want to tell a story like that and say I don't have proof. But look, that is my experience. That is what I saw. And, you know, it definitely opened my mind a little bit to the possibility that there are things like this out there. That pyramid I saw, it could have been a craft that was designed by us, that was being flown around Alaska in remote places where people were unlikely to see it for the purposes of testing and R&D. But if that was technology we have, I don't understand its purpose. I don't understand why it would need to look like that. And there were no visible signs of propulsion, of what would keep it afloat. And it was smooth stone on every side.
I think it's interesting because I think you and I are very much alike. I mean, you said that after you had that experience when you were 18, you kind of went on like a mission to try to figure out what it could be, or just kind of a broader sense, like spirituality. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm kind of on that same mission now. I never had a catalyst like you had with that weight on your bed. But kind of starting this podcast has put me on a similar path. And I've been watching a lot of videos on quantum mechanics and the double slit experiment, and just UFO videos and things like that too, but also consciousness and interdimensional, you know, possibilities, simulation. Are we in a simulation? All these things. And as you're telling your story and the different experiences you had in the Yukon and just you know, as a Freemason and just all these things, I just, you know, I guess as of this recording, the latest congressional hearing was 3 weeks ago, I think, something like that, where some of these whistleblowers went into the U.S. Congress and talked. I think the last one about a year ago, they talked about, you know, interdimensional beings or having an interdimensional component. I just can't help but think that all of these things I think are very much connected. You mentioned different religions of the world earlier and how they have common denominators, and it just seems like one of the reasons I started this podcast is because the term UFO had so much stigma that the U.S. government and I guess now the world has come up with just another acronym, UAP, just because they wanted to get rid of that stigma. And I think ghosts, have that same stigma as well.
Yeah, which is why they're using terms like NHI.
Yeah, NHI, exactly. It's a much broader term.
Sounds more scientific.
Yeah, it does a little bit. But I just get this sense that these different, all this lore and all these paranormal themes that have been interwoven throughout our lives, we're the same age, they're all like coalescing.
Yeah.
And I think some point in the future, I think we're going to have some sort of breakthrough, whether it is through quantum mechanics or something, that we're going to realize all these things are real, even angels in the Bible.
Yeah, I think if I agree with you. I think if you take the mythology of religions that have existed and have lasted, and you take all those beings and stories and you write them down and you say, okay, we've got angels, we've got demons, we've got heaven and hell, we've got purgatory, we've got Ezekiel and his wheel, and we've got Jesus, and we've got the book of Revelation, then we've got UAPs and ghosts and abductions. You lay them all out on a piece of paper. You can then, on top of that, you can, as a framework, you can lay almost any religion, and it fits. The different templates kind of fit all the explanations in, and so I suspect that regardless of what religion has become and how it's been used as a system of control or as a way to gain power, and it clearly has been abused like that in the past and even today, as much as that is true, I think it's also true that religion provided people access to something that we don't have access to anymore. It laid out a pathway that said, if you follow this pathway, you might discover the greater truth, whatever that is. And that people just eventually realized that we're so desperate to know what's going on because it's scary to not, that people will believe whatever you put in front of them. And then as a result, you can manipulate them to get what you need and for personal gain. But it doesn't, I think, negate the fact that there was a kind of universal truth that all of them are pointing towards. And yeah, I suspect that, if I could share this with you, I don't know what I don't and do believe across most of these topics. However, the older I get and the more I look into it, the more I lean towards the idea that we probably are living in some sort of a simulation. But it just may not be the kind of simulation that we're imagining or that's being explained to us. In a sense, you can look at the book of Genesis as God creating the simulation and have that kind of model of existence work within the existing text of the Bible. You could look at the double slit experiment and say, yeah, like matter is generated as it needs to be generated based on who's perceiving it. That's why things change when they're observed. Much like a video game, you only need to render out as much of the world as being explored at that time, and it starts to feel like that might be true. And experiments like double slit and others can sort of lend weight to that. I think what is exciting about the developments in the UAP, non-human intelligence space at the moment, is that they probably will, I guess, affirm a number of suspicions around simulation theory, but in a way that doesn't necessarily have to contradict with a lot of the other things that already exist that might lean in that direction. And so, yeah, for me, the exploration of what consciousness is and how consciousness might continue without a body, how consciousness might intersect, how consciousness might just be a collective kind of energy that we're all drawing from, or that it's an individual energy that we can share with each other. I'm not sure, but I think the study of consciousness through the framework of maybe simulation theory can provide an explanation to a lot of these things that doesn't necessarily discredit old religions as much as just kind of highlight how far we've strayed from what they were originally intending to do, perhaps. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, when you read certain Hindu and Buddhist texts that give instructions on prayer, they're very similar to the instructions that shamans give their followers on how to access the DMT that's just inert in people. So they're all kind of teaching you the same thing. They're just framing it differently. I think there's going to be some interesting developments in that space. And it's exciting to see more and more people smarter than me, like, looking into this. And that's why I think, what you're doing with this podcast is important, because for too long, people weren't free or safe to share their stories. It's taken me 20 years to decide to share mine more broadly. But every story that exists is a point of data. And why wouldn't we want to get as much of that as we can?
All right, club members, another episode in the books, and Josh is the man, isn't he? Him and I have actually become pretty close since the recording of this episode. We have talked quite a bit outside of a recording, and we have so much in common. It's actually kind of weird, and it's also kind of strange because I've had family members and friends say that we actually kind of look alike. Josh is like the Australian doppelganger of me. It's pretty awesome. Or maybe I'm the American doppelganger of him. I'm not sure. But it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning of this episode, where that's one of the most surprising and awesome parts of this podcast so far, selfishly, is that I'm meeting some incredible people. And it's been a really cool journey so far. And I hope everyone is getting something out of these stories, because I think that they are incredible, and I really think that we're doing something special here. I know it's really early on, but those that are listening, I really do appreciate you, and I'm excited to see what the future holds. I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a pretty high probability that this may not be the last time that you hear from Josh. I'll leave it at that for now. Anyway, thanks again for listening. This episode has been produced by Justin Gearhart. It's been mixed and mastered by Brett Jarvis. If you or someone you know has a story to tell and you want to share it, please email stories@closeencounterclub.com. Please don't forget to leave a 5-star review on all platforms. It really does go a long way. And you've been listening to the Close Encounter Club.